Hey everyone, in this video, I'm gonna show you 5 common mistakes that people do on Zapier. First mistake I wanna talk about is having more than one filter in your Zap. For example, as you can see here, I've used 2 filters, one to filter out the projects that only contain one, and another filter to filter emails that only contain my name, which of course is not a good way to do the Zap. What would I do in this case? Instead of using 2 filters, I would just use the and here and add the email part to it, and it would work exactly the same as if I had 2 filters. In other cases, you would want to use the or statement so that another condition would happen and the Zap would still continue. So for example, I wanted to also trigger for projects number 2, for example. Again, I can add an and statement to the same or statement. So if those 2 conditions are correct, it would then continue the Zap. And if those 2 conditions are correct, the Zap would also continue. This is a much better way than using 2 filters, which of course we are going to delete. Mistake number 2. This mistake I actually did myself before and I didn't know better, but now I do. This mistake was I had a bunch of strings, comma separated, that I wanted to convert into line items. So I used Zapier's formatter, text to line items, and as you can see here, I want to get the notes as line items, which is here, and then I want to get the products as line items, which is here, and then I want to get the quantity as line items, as you see here. I actually did exactly the same mistake before. I had 5 fields that were string comma separated, and I wanted to convert them into line items. I had 5 formatter steps, which of course wasn't the correct way to do it. What's the correct way? Instead of using the action in utilities, text to line items, I shouldn't use the action line itemizer, create, append, prepend. So here I added all of the items that I want to convert into line items, such as notes, product, and quantities. And I mapped the correct fields, as you can see. And then here, if I test, as you can see, I have one item which includes notes, products, and quantities, another item that has notes, products, and quantities, and so on. Of course, you have to have the same number of notes, same number of products, and same number of quantities so that it can know which belongs to which. There is also a very, very neat option, which is the subtotal property. So if you have a property called price and the property called quantity for quantity in your line item above, you can tell Zapier to actually multiply those values together to create a corresponding subtotal, which is not something available here since this is only one item, so there is nothing to actually multiply. The third mistake that many people fall into is Zapier being stuck in a loop. This happens when you have 2 apps that are updating each other. So, for example, in this case, I have a new or updated record in Airstable as a trigger. And then here, for example, I would have a Google Sheets step to update a record, a row in Google Sheets, like here, update spreadsheet row. Okay. And then I would have another Zap that has the opposite. It has a trigger as updated Google Sheet and then an action for updating Airtable. This would cause Zapier to be stuck in a loop because every time this sheet is updated, then it's going to trigger the other Zap, which in return updates the Airtable, which in return updates Google Sheets, and so on. So it would then get stuck in a loop. How to avoid that? There are several ways to avoid that. The most common way is to have one field that is common between both the trigger and the action. What I would do here is I would have a field that is called update Zapier, and it would be a checkbox. In this case, if the checkbox is not checked, then this app shouldn't start. How would I do that? I would add here a filter by Zapier, and I would make it so that this field exists or equals 1, whichever, or Boolean is true. Both will work since it passed Airtable. Of course, here I did the very first mistake that I talked about in the video, which is having more than one filter in this app. So, of course, I wouldn't do that. What I would do is go to the existing filter and add the field here. Fourth mistakes that many people also fall into is having several zaps that triggers on the same event. Like, for example, here, when I say updated record in Airtable, and I'm choosing a specific Airtable, which is Zapier tutorial within the table data tutorial. If I would copy this zap and duplicate it and have two zaps trigger with exactly the same event, there's a very high chance that only one of them is going to trigger. This happens with many apps. It's not only Airtable. For example, DocuSign has this exact thing. So if you have a trigger that is DocuSign and it triggers when a certain envelope, well, it's not actually a certain envelope, it would be any envelope that is completed. This is a common mistake that many people fall into. For example, DocuSign can have a trigger when an envelope is completed. So envelope sent or completed. Okay. And then if you choose this trigger and for example, let's say you have several envelopes and so you have several zaps that do different actions for each envelope. If you duplicate the zap and imagine that it's going to trigger for all the envelopes and then maybe add here a filter, this is definitely not the correct way to do it. What you would want to do is have only one zap that triggers on DocuSign envelope sent or completed, and then use paths by Zapier to tell Zapier which path it should move into depending on which envelope is actually completed. The last common mistake I want to talk about, it's actually a very common one. And on Zapier community, I see this question a lot. Let's go back to Airtable. Now that we are back using the Airtable trigger, as you can see here, I have a text field and I have several other fields. So the last mistake I want to talk about is line items versus comma separated text. As you can see, this is a comma separated text and this is a line item. How do I know that? As you can see, this is all in one line. It just has a comma between the values, while this has a separate line for each of the values. If we try to pass these values in any app that supports line items, like for example, QBO, QuickBooks Online, and in here, the action is create invoice with line item support. If we try to come here and use this value, which is a comma separated string, it's gonna return an error. So what should I do in this case? In this case, we are going to use the step that we already discussed, which is in Formatted by Zapier under Utilities, which is the line itemizer, which converts a string of comma separated items into actual line items. And then I can come here and I can use the reply from this step, which is the output. Although here I can still see it as comma separated string, it is actually a line item. It is in the correct format and I can actually use it. Those are 5 common mistakes on Zapier that I wanted to discuss with you today. See you in the next video.